People look at me now and see a harmless old lady. I've got my gray hair pulled back in a soft bun, my floral apron tied just right, and a teacup in hand most days. I tend to my tomatoes. I knit scarves I never wear. I wave at the mailman and thank the Lord for every new sunrise, but none of them know the truth I carry in my bones, a truth I've swallowed for 70 years. They don't know that behind these gentle hands is a story soaked in silence, that every smile I offer is a bandage over a wound I learned to hide before I even knew what healing was. They don't know what it's like to grow up in a house where the monster sleeps down the hall and calls you sweetheart. My name is Lillian Mayfield. Most folks call me Miss Lily. I'm 82 years old and I've lived in this same little house in Louisiana for over 50 years. On Sundays, I sit on the third pew at Mount Zion Church. On Tuesdays, I bake peach cobbler for the ladies' circle. And on Thursdays, I drive down to the old community center to teach a quilting class to girls who remind me a little too much of myself. People say I have a peaceful life, but peace is something I never truly learned. I only learned how to survive in its absence. Some stories never get told because they're too dark, too ugly, too soaked in shame and disbelief. I've carried one of those stories inside me since I was 12 years old. It clung to me like humidity in July, thick, heavy, hard to breathe through. I buried it so deep that sometimes I forgot it was even there. But it was. It always was. And then, 2 winters ago, a stranger left a note on my porch, a folded slip of paper inside a weathered Bible, with my name written on the front in shaking blue ink. The note was only 7 words long, but it cracked my silence wide open. I remember, and I believe you, Lily. I read those words 100 times, 1,000 maybe, because for the first time in 70 years, someone saw me. Not the grandmother, not the quiet neighbor, me. And that's why I'm here now, telling this, speaking it aloud after all this time, not because I'm strong or because I want attention, but because silence is a kind of death, and I've already died once before. When I was 12 years old, my uncle began selling me to men. That sentence alone should make your stomach turn. I wish it weren't true. I wish I were just another old woman who married young, raised babies, and baked pies on holidays. But I wasn't given that life. I was given something else, something cruel. And he was my daddy's brother. Came to live with us after Daddy passed in an accident at the mill, said he wanted to help raise me right. Mama was too tired and too broken to say no. And just like that, he made our home his hunting ground. He didn't steal me away in the night. He didn't drag me off kicking and screaming. That would have made things clearer. Cleaner, maybe. No, he did it the way cowards always do. Slowly. Quietly. With a smile on his face and the world watching. Blind. He told me I was special, that I was lucky to be loved by him, that other girls would kill to be chosen, and I believed him at first, because when you're a child and the people you trust poison you with lies, you drink them like water. I'm telling this now because someone out there is still waiting for a note. Someone is still thinking they imagined what happened to them, still waiting to be believed. And maybe if they hear my voice, shaking, cracking, old as it is, they'll believe themselves a little more. This is not just my story. It belongs to every girl who screamed and wasn't heard, every child who was told to be quiet, to be grateful, to stop making things up, every woman who still flinches when someone walks too close. Everyone believed the lie, but I lived it, and now I'm ready to tell it. Before everything changed, I was just a quiet girl in a hot, broken-down town nobody ever wrote songs about. I was born in 1943 in Shreveport, Louisiana, back when kids ran barefoot and neighbors watched out for each other, or at least pretended to. We lived in a tiny yellow clapboard house at the end of a gravel road. It had 3 rooms, 1 bathroom with a rusty tub, and a porch swing that creaked every time the wind shifted. Mama said I was a good baby. Slept through the night, barely cried. But I think I learned early that crying didn't change much. Life didn't make room for softness in our house. Mama worked 2 jobs, waitress at the diner and part-time janitor at the high school. She came home with her back bent and her hands raw from bleach, but she never complained, just lit a cigarette and stared at the wall like she was trying to burn a hole through time. My daddy died when I was just 2, crushed under a stack of lumber at the sawmill. They said it was quick. I don't remember his face. Only the picture we kept on the mantel, a man in suspenders holding a baby who looked a lot like me. I used to stare at that photo and wonder if he'd have protected me, if he'd have stopped what happened later. But wondering never helped much. It was just me and Mama for years. Quiet nights, ham hocks and beans, radio dramas on the kitchen counter. I loved school. I was small for my age, but smart. My teachers said I read like I had fire in my brain. Books were the only place that felt safe, where girls could slay dragons and solve mysteries and run away and always come home again. I had one friend, Becca Jameson, freckles, chipped tooth, heart of gold. She was loud where I was quiet, bold where I was careful. She used to tell me stories about growing up and moving to New York to be an actress. I didn't dream that big. I just wanted to be a librarian and live in a house with no shouting. But when I turned 9, everything shifted. Uncle Ray moved in. He wasn't a total stranger. He came around for holidays when I was younger, brought me those stiff plastic dolls from the drugstore and patted my head like I was a pet. But when he moved into our house full time, something in the air went wrong. It got tighter, heavy. Mama said he had nowhere else to go. He's blood, she told me, like that was enough to overlook everything that came after. I don't think she ever looked me in the eyes when she said it, just wiped the counter and lit another cigarette. Ray had just come back from some job in Texas, and the way he told it, he'd seen things, done things. He always had a beer in one hand and a Bible in the other, like that made him righteous. He talked a lot, about sinners, about how women were meant to obey, about how the world was falling apart without men like him to keep it straight. He said he was going to teach me to be a lady. I was 9. At first, it was just little things. He'd stand too close in the hallway, hold my shoulders too long, make jokes that made my stomach twist, even if I didn't fully understand why. He had a way of saying things that sounded like compliments, but landed like punches. "You're growing up fast, Lily. You'll be a woman soon. Got curves already." I didn't know how to tell Mama. I tried once when I was 10, told her Ray made me uncomfortable. She rolled her eyes and said, "Men just don't know how to act sometimes. Just stay out of his way." So I did. I got quiet, quieter than usual. I stopped drawing. I stopped laughing with Becca. I didn't want to go home after school. I lingered at the library until the sun dipped too low and Miss Perkins gently nudged me out the door. I started locking my bedroom door, though the latch didn't work properly. Ray didn't like that. He started watching me more closely, asking where I'd been, what I was doing, who I was talking to, and always with that oily grin, like he knew something I didn't. The summer I turned 11, things got worse. He'd come into my room when Mama was at work, sit on the edge of my bed, ask questions he shouldn't ask. Once, he touched the hem of my nightgown and said, "Pretty fabric. Bet it feels nice." I remember thinking in that moment that I must have done something wrong, that maybe I was being punished, that maybe this was normal and I just didn't understand the rules because no one else was stopping it. And Mama still smiled at him. The neighbors still waved, and the world kept spinning. Then came the blue dress. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with a string. He handed it to me one morning when Mama had just left for the diner. "You're becoming a young lady," he said. "Should dress the part." It wasn't the kind of dress a girl wore to church or school. It was tight, shiny, cheap. It smelled like something sweet and wrong. I said thank you because I didn't know what else to say. He made me try it on in front of him. I remember the way his eyes dragged across me, like I wasn't a girl anymore, like I wasn't a person. Something shifted in my chest that day, a crack, a warning, like the earth trembling just before the fault line breaks. I didn't know it then, but that dress was the beginning of my cage. I never wore the blue dress again. After that first time, I hid it in the back of my closet behind an old blanket Mama had crocheted before I was born. but I could still feel it, like it clung to my skin long after I'd taken it off. The days that followed blurred together. I don't remember what I ate or what I did in school. I only remember the feeling, like I was walking through water, heavy, slow, cold, even when the sun was hot. Uncle Ray started calling me his little lady, said it in front of people with that same smile that made my skin crawl. Mama would laugh, sometimes play along. "She's growing up," she'd say. "Can't keep her little forever." But I wasn't growing up. I was disappearing. And then came the night I stopped being a child. It was late August. The air smelled like pine sap and dust. Mama was working the overnight cleaning shift at the high school. Extra money for school clothes, she said. I'd just turned 12 a few weeks earlier. Becca had come over that day to show me her new shoes and tell me about the boy she liked, but I'd barely heard her. I was already pulling away from the world, and I think she knew it. I think that's why she hugged me tighter than usual before she left. That night, I locked my door, pushed the old dresser in front of it like I'd done once or twice before. Ray had been drinking since noon. I could hear the bottles clinking, his boots pacing back and forth, the TV muttering in the background. Then silence. When the doorknob turned, I stopped breathing. He didn't knock. He never did. He never asked. The sound of the wood scraping as he pushed against the dresser was louder than anything I've ever heard. I remember standing frozen in the corner of the room, hands shaking, heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. I had a pair of scissors on the desk, and for a second I thought about grabbing them, but I didn't. I was 12. 12? When the door finally gave, he stepped into the room like he belonged there, like nothing was wrong, like it was his house. His room, his right. What happened after that came in flashes. The smell of sweat and liquor, his hands on my arms, my voice trying to scream but coming out like a whisper, the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead, the pull chain clicking gently like a clock counting down. I left my body that night. I remember floating above myself, staring down at the girl in the corner, the girl who couldn't move, the girl who stopped being a girl. When it was over, he stood up, adjusted his belt, and leaned down close to my ear. "You don't tell nobody," he said. "Not your mama, not your little friend, not nobody. You hear me, Lily? No one's going to believe you anyway." Then he left. I lay there for hours, curled in a ball, staring at the crack in the wall where the plaster was peeling. I didn't cry. Not then. Not that night. I didn't know how. The next morning, I made breakfast like nothing had happened. Scrambled eggs and burnt toast. Mama didn't notice anything was off. She was too tired, too distracted, too worn down by the weight of her own life to see what was happening right in front of her. Ray winked at me when he sat down, patted my hand like I was his favorite niece. I wanted to throw up. School started the next week. I went through the motions, did my homework, answered questions, smiled when I was supposed to. But I wasn't really there. I was somewhere else. Locked in a room I couldn't escape from, even when I was outside. The worst part wasn't the pain. It wasn't even the fear. It was the silence. The knowing that no one would save me. Because I'd already tried. I'd already hinted. And no one had listened. After that night, it didn't stop. He found ways to get me alone. In the laundry room, in the car. Once in the back pew of the church during choir rehearsal. Each time he reminded me, "You're mine. Don't forget that." And each time I disappeared a little more. Becca noticed. She asked me one day why I didn't laugh anymore, why I flinched when someone touched my shoulder. I told her I was just tired, just not feeling well. She believed me. Because why wouldn't she? We were kids, and kids shouldn't have to know the kind of truth I was choking on. Then, one afternoon, I came home from school and found two men in the living room, well-dressed, smiling. One of them looked me up and down like I was something hanging in a store window. Ray put his hand on my shoulder and said, "This here's my Lily. She's special." The man nodded. "She'll do." I didn't understand what that meant until later, that Ray hadn't just been abusing me, he was selling me. That night, he told me to dress nice. said we were going for a ride. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and went upstairs because somewhere deep inside, a part of me had already shut off. We drove to a house on the edge of town. Big, fancy, full of perfume and laughter that didn't sound right. A woman opened the door. Older. Painted face. She looked at me with pity, then looked away. That night was the first time I was trafficked. I didn't even know what that word meant. All I knew was that I wasn't a person anymore. I was a thing, a body. And the man who'd promised to protect me, the man my family had welcomed into our home, had sold me like I was nothing. After that night, something inside me broke for good. Not loudly, not all at once. It was a slow, aching fracture, like ice cracking beneath your feet while you're still standing on it. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just went quiet. I moved through each day like I was watching someone else live it. Woke up, went to school, did the dishes, folded laundry, smiled when I had to. But inside, I was gone. A hollow version of the girl I used to be. Ray stopped pretending after that. He didn't care if Mama was home. He didn't care if I was bleeding or shaking or numb. He'd say things to me at the dinner table that no one else seemed to hear. Brush against me in the hallway and whisper, "Remember who you belong to." I'd nod, because what else could I do? One day, I found a small cut on my thigh. I didn't know where it came from. I stared at it for hours like it might give me an answer, but all it gave me was confirmation. I was falling apart. I stopped talking to Becca. She wrote me notes in class, called the house, even knocked on the door once. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because if I let her in, she'd see the truth, and I couldn't bear the look in her eyes when she realized what I'd become. The worst part was Mama. She never asked. Not once. I don't think she didn't care. I think she knew. At least some part of her did. But to acknowledge it would have meant changing everything. Would have meant survival might not be enough anymore. So she did what so many women do. She chose silence. And so did I. Then one morning in November, I woke up feeling sick. Not just tired, not just sore. Sick. My stomach turned at the smell of bacon. The sunlight hurt my eyes. I thought maybe it was the flu. It wasn't. I was 12 and pregnant. It took me weeks to admit it to myself. I'd seen what happened to girls like me, heard the stories whispered behind hands in the church foyer. She was wild. She asked for it, ran off with a man. You know how fast they grow up nowadays. But I wasn't wild. I wasn't fast. I was a child. I tried to tell Mama. I started 3 different times. Each time I choked on the words. She'd just stare at me with those tired eyes and say, "Lord, I don't know what's gotten into you lately. You've been strange." And I wanted to scream, wanted to beg her to see me, but I couldn't. I went to the only place I thought might listen, the church. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The sanctuary was empty, just the creak of the wooden pews and the hum of the fans. I found Pastor Gerald in his office, writing a sermon by hand. He looked up, smiled warmly. "Miss Lily," he said. "You all right, sweetheart?" I opened my mouth to speak. My throat went dry. I could feel the words pushing at the back of my teeth, but they wouldn't come. Finally, I whispered, "Something bad happened." He furrowed his brow. "You in trouble, child?" I nodded. He leaned forward. "What kind of trouble?" And I almost told him. I swear I did. But then his eyes flicked to the door, and in the hallway Ray stood, watching, smiling. I froze. I don't feel good," I mumbled. "That's all." Pastor Gerald patted my hand. "You get yourself some rest now, all right? Come back and talk to me when you're feeling better." I never went back. The next few months were a blur. I wore baggy clothes, stayed home more, pretended everything was normal even as my body betrayed me. At night, I'd press my hand against my stomach and whisper, "I'm sorry," over and over. Like maybe the baby could hear me. Like maybe they'd know I hadn't chosen this, that I would have protected them if I could, but I couldn't even protect myself. I gave birth at home. Ray made arrangements with a woman he knew, some midwife out in the woods who didn't ask questions. Mama was told I had the flu. She stayed with a friend for the weekend while I screamed into a pillow and bled onto the floor. The baby was a girl. She was so small, so quiet. I reached for her, but the woman wrapped her up and handed her to Ray. And just like that, she was gone. I don't know where he took her. He never said. I asked once. Just once. He slapped me so hard I saw stars and said, "You lost your right to ask questions." After that, I didn't ask again. I named her anyway, Sarah. It was the name I used to give my dolls when I played make-believe, the name I whispered into the night, the name I wrote again and again in a notebook I kept hidden under the floorboard in my room, my secret, my only tether to the part of me that still wanted to live. Years passed. I survived. I grew older. The abuse didn't stop, but I learned how to make myself small, how to go numb, how to disappear in plain sight. And all the while, the world kept spinning. People grew up, moved away. Becca left for nursing school. Mama got sick. Ray got meaner. But no one ever asked what had happened to the girl who used to smile. I kept the notebook hidden, page after page of letters to Sarah, stories I made up, wishes I couldn't say aloud, hopes I didn't really believe in anymore, but it helped, just a little, enough to keep breathing, enough to keep going, until one day, something shifted, and the past I'd buried so deep began to claw its way back to the surface. By the time I turned 16, I didn't recognize the girl in the mirror anymore. Ray still lived with us, still controlled everything, what I wore, where I went, who I spoke to. But the visits from his friends slowed down, not because he felt guilt, but because I'd lost something he'd once been able to sell, my youth, my silence, my shine. He used to tell me I was getting too old to be useful. I think he meant it as an insult, but to me it sounded like a way out. Mama's health started to fail not long after. Her lungs were weak, maybe from all the years breathing bleach and cigarette smoke. I became her caretaker, cooked for her, cleaned her up when the coughing fits were bad. I loved her, even after everything. That was the hard part, loving someone who let it happen, loving someone who maybe knew. When I was 19, Mama passed away. She died quietly one evening in her sleep. I found her with her hands folded over her chest, eyes half open. I didn't cry. I just sat beside her for hours, waiting for someone to knock, to tell me what to do next. Ray didn't shed a tear, just smoked a cigarette on the porch and said, "Well, that's that." After the funeral, I packed up what little I had and left. It wasn't a grand escape. I didn't run off in the middle of the night with a suitcase and a plan. I walked down to the bus stop and bought a one-way ticket to Monroe with the tips I'd saved from waiting tables at the diner. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I just got on the bus and didn't look back. In Monroe, I found work cleaning rooms at a motel off the highway. I slept in a tiny unit above the office and kept my head down. I was 20 years old and already felt 100. The man who owned the place was kind in the way a neighbor might be. Not too close, not too curious. He gave me Sundays off and let me keep a cat I found behind the dumpster. Her name was Junie. She followed me everywhere, slept at my feet, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel completely alone. I didn't tell anyone my real story. I told them my parents had died young and I was just figuring things out. People didn't press. Folks don't ask too many questions when a girl works hard and keeps to herself. Sometimes, in the quiet hours between room checkouts, I'd sit on the edge of the bed and write letters to Sarah. I didn't know where she was. I didn't even know if she was alive. But I wrote anyway. I told her about June, about the way the sky turned pink at dusk in Monroe, about how much I wanted to hold her, how sorry I was. I kept the letters in a shoebox under the bed. They were all I had. Years went by. I met a man once, Harold. Kind eyes, soft voice. He worked at the auto shop across the street and used to bring me lunch on Thursdays. I liked him, maybe even loved him in my own quiet way. But I never let it go far. I didn't know how to be touched without remembering. One night he reached for my hand and I flinched so hard I knocked over a glass. I saw the way his face changed, softened, then dimmed. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and said, "You've been through something." I nodded too. He didn't press. We stopped seeing each other after that. I eventually left Monroe, moved farther south, and got a job as a housekeeper for a retired teacher named Mrs. Greer. She had a big, creaky house with too many windows and not enough company. She liked my quiet, paid me fairly, let me live in the little guest house out back. That's where I stayed for the next 20 years. I read, I wrote, I planted roses, I saved every penny. Time softened some of the sharp edges, but it never erased them. There were nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, shaking, with Ray's voice echoing in my ears. Other times, I'd hear a baby cry in the grocery store and feel like the floor was tipping beneath me. But mostly, I learned to live with it. The silence, the scars, the knowing. I told myself Sarah had been adopted by a good family, that she was loved, that maybe she never knew what I went through or who I was. That was the only way I could go on. By the time I was in my 50s, I'd bought a small home in a quiet town, started volunteering at the library. People knew me as Miss Lily, the soft-spoken woman who always had a sweater and a kind word. No one ever guessed what I carried. No one ever asked. And I told myself that was a gift. But the past has a strange way of circling back. It waits in the shadows of your memory, quiet and patient. It knows when to strike. And for me, that moment came on a Tuesday morning in January. I was sweeping the porch when I saw it, an old leather-bound Bible sitting on the top step. No note, no explanation, just the book, weather-worn, heavy. I picked it up, opened it. Inside was a slip of paper, folded once neatly. My hands shook as I unfolded it. 7 words. "I remember, and I believe you, Lily." No signature, no address, just that. But it was enough, because for the first time in 70 years, someone knew. Someone had seen me. Someone remembered. I read that note at least 100 times that first day. "I remember, and I believe you, Lily." It was like someone had cracked open my rib cage and shone a flashlight straight into the part of me I'd buried for decades. My hands trembled. My knees gave way. I sat down hard on the porch steps, the Bible still clutched in my lap like it could anchor me to the world. Who sent it? It wasn't Becca. She'd moved away years ago. Last I heard, she was in Georgia with grandkids of her own. I thought of Harold, but no, he wouldn't know. No one knew. No one could have known. Unless they had been there, or had seen something they weren't supposed to, or had been like me. The handwriting was familiar. But time plays tricks on your memory, and I couldn't place it. All I knew was this. Someone out there had carried this secret too, and now they had passed it back to me like a torch. For the rest of that week, I didn't sleep much. I sat up with the Bible on my lap, the note beside me, reading through pages I hadn't touched in years. Some verses I remembered from childhood, others stung in new ways. But I kept coming back to one, Luke 8:17. "For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light." The next morning, I went into the attic. I hadn't been up there in years, not since my hips started aching. The air was thick with dust and heat, and the floorboards groaned beneath me. In the far corner, wrapped in a faded quilt, was the shoebox. The same one I'd carried with me through every home, every move, every chapter. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, all written to Sarah, some with drawings, some stained with old tears. I hadn't opened that box in over 20 years, but somehow it still smelled faintly of lavender and ink. I sat there on the attic floor reading each one. I didn't recognize my own handwriting in some. It had changed with age, with grief, with time. But the words were mine. The hope, the pain, the apologies. I wondered if she ever knew I existed. I wondered if she hated me. The next Sunday, I walked 2 blocks down to the post office. It was closed, of course. It was Sunday. but I stood outside and stared at the bulletin board. Sometimes people posted photos, missing pets, local events, community notes. And there, pinned beneath a flyer for a pancake breakfast, was a small Polaroid. A girl, 17, maybe 18, long dark hair, brown eyes. The caption said, "Seeking birth mother. Born 1956, Louisiana, no name on file, left with midwife, searching for any information. Please contact this number if you know anything." My heart stopped. I tore the photo from the board, held it in my hand. I couldn't breathe. I knew it wasn't Sarah. Couldn't be. The timeline didn't match. But something about her eyes, something in the curve of her mouth, made my soul ache. There were others. It hit me like a wave. There were others. Other girls. Other babies. I wasn't the only one. Maybe not even the first. Ray had done this before. Maybe after. Maybe many times. I'd always thought I was the only one, that my suffering was a single thread. But it wasn't. It was part of a web. I went home and pulled out every piece of paper I had. Old letters, newspaper clippings, records. I started searching names I remembered from childhood. One in particular stuck out. Doris Alston. That was the midwife who delivered Sarah. I remembered her eyes, hollow and tired, like she didn't have the strength to stop what she was part of. She would have been long gone by now. But I looked anyway. Found her obituary in an old digital archive. Died in 1973. No children, no husband. But something in the comments section caught my attention. A woman had written, "She helped me when no one else would. Gave me answers I needed after all these years. May she rest in peace." I clicked her profile. Her name was Cynthia, and she lived in Lafayette. I sent her a message. It was short, polite, careful. "Hi, I'm looking into a woman named Doris Alston. I saw your comment on her obituary. I believe she may have assisted in a birth connected to me in 1956. If you're willing, I'd like to speak." She replied within an hour. "I know who you are. I've been waiting for you to reach out." That sentence nearly knocked the air out of my chest. How? Who was she? We arranged a phone call. I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at the receiver like it might bite me. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it when it rang. "Miss Lily," she said, her voice soft and weathered. "I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you. I was 13 when my mother, Doris, delivered your baby." I didn't speak. I couldn't. She never talked about her work. But that night she came home and cried for hours. I'd never seen her like that. She told me, that girl was just a child. And she looked at that baby like it was her whole heart. I was crying now too. She said the man who brought you in. She said something wasn't right, that he was evil. But she was scared. Said he had power. Said if she spoke out, he'd ruin her. I whispered, "Where is Sarah?" Cynthia was quiet for a long time. "I don't know, but I think I know someone who might." Cynthia gave me a name. James Alston, her older brother. He'd been the one to help their mother keep records, especially when things started to go quiet in the late 50s. Back then, there were no official adoption agencies in places like ours. Just whispers, handoffs, cash in envelopes, and girls like me left bleeding in silence. "He kept everything," Cynthia said. "He's got boxes of files in his garage. He didn't know what to do with them after she died, but I think he was waiting for someone to come ask." I called him the next morning. My voice barely held steady, but I said my name, said the year, said I believed his mother had delivered my baby. There was a pause. Then he asked, "What was your name again?" "Lillian Mayfield." He took a breath so sharp I heard it whistle through the line. I remember. I drove to Lafayette the next day. I hadn't left my town in years. The highway looked different, wider, emptier. But something in me stirred as I drove. The feeling of motion, of doing after decades of stillness was almost unbearable. James was older than I expected. Mid-80s, thin, glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He met me on the porch with a look I'll never forget. Not pity, not curiosity, recognition. He led me to the garage. Inside were shelves covered in dust and files, hundreds of them. She kept everything, he said, even the ones she was told to destroy. He handed me a box labeled 1956, Spring Summer. My hands shook as I flipped through folders, the smell of old paper filling the air. And then I saw it. Female infant delivered July 3rd, 1956. No name. Birth mother, L. Mayfield. There it was. Proof. My breath caught in my chest. There was an address scrawled at the bottom in blue ink. A name. The Lockhart family. No first names, just a location. Red River Parish. I stared at it like it might vanish. For 70 years, I had carried that child in my heart. For 70 years, I had imagined her gone, dead, erased. But she had lived. She had a name, a family, a life. James said he didn't know much more. His mother had stopped talking about that time, too afraid of what she might remember, but he gave me something else. A letter, folded, yellowed, sealed in an envelope with my name written on the front in a neat, slanted hand. She left this, he said, in the Bible. Told me if a woman named Lily ever came looking, this was hers. I sat in my car and opened it slowly. I'm sorry, Lily. I wanted to keep her. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid. He threatened to hurt my daughter if I spoke. I made sure she went to a good home. I promise you, she was wanted. She was loved. Forgive me. No signature. Just that. I held the letter to my chest and cried like I hadn't in years. Like that little girl I used to be was curled up beside me again, sobbing on the floor of that quiet car. I went home that night and dug through the old notebooks. I pulled out every letter I'd ever written to Sarah. I reread them by candlelight. In one, I had written, "If you're out there, I want you to know. I never stopped loving you. Not once. Not for a moment." And then it hit me. The note. I remember, and I believe you, Lily. It wasn't just kindness. It was her. Sarah. It had to be. Someone who remembered. Someone who believed me. Someone who knew. The next morning, I drove to Red River Parish. It took me 3 hours and a prayer to get there. I followed the address from the file to a small white house with blue shutters and a swing on the porch. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they went numb. I didn't get out. I just watched. There were wind chimes on the porch and a dog sleeping in the grass. After 20 minutes, the door opened and a woman stepped out. She had gray streaks in her dark hair, wore a soft cardigan and jeans. She looked ordinary, like someone you might pass in the grocery store. But when she turned toward me, I saw it. My eyes, my mother's chin, my hands. It was her, Sarah. She looked directly at my car and nodded, like she knew, like she had been waiting. I didn't get out that day. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move and my throat had closed up. But I came back the next week, and the one after that. I haven't spoken to her yet, but I will. I will. It took me 3 visits before I found the courage to knock on her door. I'd rehearsed it in my head 1,000 times. What I'd say, what I wouldn't. I wrote it out in full paragraphs, then threw them all away. Because how do you introduce yourself to your own child? How do you say, "I'm your mother," when the world made sure you were never allowed to be? It was a Thursday. The air was warm. The sky one of those soft, endless blues that makes you feel like anything is possible. I stood on the porch with my hands clenched into fists, trying to hold my breath steady. I was shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of it all. The years, the silence, the not knowing. And then the door opened. She looked just like before, calm, composed. But this time, there was no distance in her eyes, no question, just quiet understanding. "Lily?" she asked. I nodded. She opened the door wider. "I made coffee," she said. Come in." The moment I stepped inside, I felt something shift in me, like the floor had tilted and righted itself at the same time. The house smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Photographs lined the walls, some black and white, some color. I tried not to stare. I tried not to count how many moments I'd missed. We sat at the kitchen table in silence for a while. She poured the coffee. I stirred mine out of habit, even though I drink it black. She was the first to speak. I found your name in a box after my parents passed. An old envelope, no return address. Just L. Mayfield. I didn't know what it meant, but I started searching. Her voice was steady, but I saw the tremble in her fingers. I was adopted by good people, kind people. They told me I was chosen, but no one ever told me about you. I nodded, eyes brimming. They wouldn't have. They weren't allowed to. I always felt something was missing, she said, voice barely a whisper. Like I came from a silence too deep to touch. I thought maybe it was just imagination. But then, a few years ago, I started having dreams. What kind of dreams? I asked, afraid of the answer. She looked away. A girl, crying, locked in a room, hands over her ears. She kept whispering, "Don't forget me." I couldn't breathe. And then I found the note. She reached over to the sideboard and pulled out the slip of paper I'd found in the Bible, the one with 7 words that changed everything. "I left it," she said. "I wasn't sure if you were still alive or if you'd even see it, but I had to try." I held it in my hands again, stunned. "Why those words?" "Because I remember," she said, her voice catching. "Not the way you do, of course, but something in me always knew, and I believe you." That's when I broke. All the years, all the pain, all the silence. I sobbed like I hadn't since I was a girl. And she didn't flinch. She reached across the table, took my hand in hers, and let me fall apart. It was the first time in my life someone had touched me without hurting me, without owning me, without taking something from me. She just held on. When the tears passed, I told her everything, not all at once, but enough. About Ray, about the dress, about that night, about the box of letters I'd written, about how I named her Sarah even though I never had the right to say it aloud. She listened, never interrupted, never judged, just listened. When I was done, she stood up, went to the cabinet, and returned with a small red box. Inside were photographs, her graduation, her wedding, a child's drawing with the words, "Best Mom," written in crayon, a boy with curly hair, and my eyes. "My son," she said, smiling. "Your grandson." I laughed through the tears. "He looks like my brother did when he was small, before everything." She nodded. "He's kind, gentle. He wants to meet you." My heart soared and sank all at once. "I don't deserve this," I whispered. "I let him win. I let him take everything." "No," she said firmly. "You survived. That's not weakness, Lily, that's strength. You were just a child, and still, you found your way back." We sat like that for hours, drinking cold coffee, catching up on decades we never got to live together. And when I finally stood to leave, she hugged me, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. It was the first hug I'd had in years that didn't make me flinch. That night, I went home and dug out the letters again. For the first time, I wasn't reading them alone. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was haunted, but because I wasn't. For the first time in 70 years, I felt something different blooming in my chest. Not joy exactly, not peace, but something close to freedom. Like I'd taken a deep breath for the first time in a life that had been one long gasp. I kept thinking about Sarah, about how she said my name, about how she didn't look away when I told her the worst things I'd ever endured. She saw me, not just the old woman with a quiet house and a trembling voice. She saw me, the little girl I'd buried decades ago and never expected to meet again. The next morning, I called Cynthia again. "There's one more thing I need to do," I said. She didn't ask questions. Ray was still alive. I'd looked him up once, maybe 10 years earlier, and found out he'd moved out to Arkansas. Lived alone, no wife, no kids, just an old trailer on a stretch of dead road. He'd had a stroke a few years back, left him with a limp and a speech slur, but not enough to stop him from living, breathing, sleeping peacefully every night while I counted ghosts in mine. I wasn't sure what I wanted from him, An apology? He didn't have one. Regret? A man like him didn't know the word. I just knew I couldn't close the door on this life without looking him in the eyes. I drove 6 hours in silence. The closer I got, the more I felt like I was time traveling, like I was peeling away layers of myself with every mile. The road narrowed, the air thickened, and when I pulled up to the trailer, my hands were ice. He was sitting on the porch, gray now, thinner, wearing that same old cap he used to wear when he'd mow the lawn. He didn't recognize me at first, but when I stepped out of the car and walked toward him, I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not fear, not shame, recognition. "Well, I'll be," he croaked. "Lily." I stood at the bottom of the steps. I didn't go any closer. "You remember what you did to me?" I asked. His mouth twitched. "What are you talking about, girl? That was years ago." "Years," I said, "and I never forgot a second of it." He snorted. "You always were dramatic." And there it was. No apology. No remorse. Just rot. I took a breath so deep it made my chest ache. "You don't scare me anymore," I said. "You don't own me. You never did." He laughed, dry and bitter. "Then what the hell you doing here?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a copy of the birth record, the photo of Sarah, a letter I'd written the night before. I tossed it onto the porch. "So you'll know. So you'll remember. So when you die, you'll carry it with you." He didn't pick it up, just stared at it like it was poison. I turned around and walked back to the car. He didn't call after me, didn't stop me. I drove away without looking back. I didn't need to. He was nothing now, just a shadow in the rear view. When I got home, Sarah called me. "I saw a therapist today," she said. "First time I've ever done that, told her about you, about us." I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks. "How'd it go?" "She said we carry pain like a second skin, but we don't have to wear it forever." I didn't say anything for a while. Then I whispered, "I'm proud of you." There was a pause. "I'm proud of you, Mama." That word, Mama, hit me like thunder. I didn't expect it, didn't feel I deserved it, but she gave it to me anyway, and I held it like a gift. In the weeks that followed, I told more people, not everyone, but the ones who mattered. The librarian I'd worked with, the neighbor who always brought me her extra tomatoes, even Becca, who I found on Facebook with the help of Sarah's son. We talked for hours. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I just didn't know what." "I didn't either," I said. "Not until it was too late." She cried. "So did I." And then she said, "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." I don't know if I'll ever feel fully healed. I don't know if justice exists for girls like me, not in the way the world means it. But something happened in those days after I met Sarah. The silence broke, and with it, the shame began to loosen its grip. I walk differently now, not because my body's stronger, it isn't, but because I'm no longer hiding. I look people in the eye. I speak when I have something to say. I wear colors again. Deep blues, soft reds, even yellow on good days. And sometimes, when I'm in the garden, I swear I hear laughter. Mine, maybe, or that little girl I once was. The one Ray never truly stole. Now in the quiet hours of the evening, I sit on my porch swing with a blanket over my legs and the sun melting behind the trees. The birds still sing like nothing ever went wrong in the world. The wind brushes the chimes with a gentleness I used to believe was only for other people. And for the first time in my life, I think I know what it means to be free. Not because the pain disappeared, it didn't. Not because I got justice in the way the courts define it, I didn't. But because I finally told the truth. I named it. And in doing so, I took back everything they tried to erase from me. I got my daughter back. I got my voice back. I got me back. Sarah comes to visit every Sunday now. She brings lemon cookies and stories about her students. She's a teacher, just like I dreamed of being once. We sit in the garden and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes she asks questions about the past, and sometimes she doesn't. She doesn't need all the pieces to understand me. She already does. She brought her son the other day, David. He's 17. Curious eyes, kind smile. When I offered him sweet tea, he said, "Thanks, Grandma." And I had to turn away so he wouldn't see me cry, because in that moment, everything came full circle. The life Ray tried to take from me, the legacy he tried to poison, still grew into something beautiful, something good, something stronger than him. I still have the box of letters, still keep them under the bed, though now they're joined by newer ones. From Sarah, from David, even from Becca, who still writes real letters, bless her. They're my proof that I lived, that I endured, that I didn't disappear, no matter how hard he tried to make me vanish. People in town know more now. Some still whisper. Some look at me with sorrow. But others look at me with respect, with something like reverence. Because they know what it takes to speak after 70 years of silence. And if you're listening now, if you've made it this far, I want you to hear me. You are not broken. You are not what they did to you. You are not invisible, no matter how long the world has looked away. Your voice matters. Your pain is real. And you deserve to tell your story, even if it trembles, even if it comes out in pieces, even if it takes a lifetime. Sometimes healing doesn't come with fanfare or headlines. Sometimes healing is a porch swing, a whispered thank you, a child's drawing on the fridge that says best grandma. Sometimes healing is knowing you survived long enough to tell the truth, and that truth, finally, has a place to land. There are still nights I wake up gasping, sweat on my brow, ghosts in the corners. Trauma doesn't just vanish because you've spoken it aloud, but now I light a candle. I sit by the window. I breathe through it. And I tell myself, you're here. You're safe. He's gone. Because the truth is, I'm not that 12-year-old girl anymore. I'm a woman who lived through hell and kept going. I'm a mother who never stopped loving the child stolen from her. I'm a grandmother with a soft voice and a steel spine, and I'm still standing. One day, when I'm gone, I hope Sarah reads this whole story. I hope David shares it with his children. I hope they say my name without shame. I hope they understand that survival isn't always pretty, that it's not always brave or clean or loud. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's hidden, sometimes it's just getting up again, but it counts. Lord knows it counts. And if there's anyone out there still waiting for their note, still hoping someone remembers them, believes them, then let me say this to you clear and true. I remember. I believe you. You are not alone. But I am now.